For many farmers, crops died. Although some thrived in extreme and arid weather, like watermelon and yucca roots, farmers even harvested tumbleweeds, which were high in iron and chlorophyll. The government noticed they were going through hard times and gave them help by lending them money or livestock and trying to create an irrigation system. Around 2.5 million were either left homeless or even decided to sell their land and move elsewhere in order to save themselves and their families, but they lost an immense amount of money by selling it for a far lesser price than they bought it for.
During the 1920s, the High Plains was compared to hell. The land was black and charred, with the air filled with smoke and the odor of perpetuity. The once area that contained grass was stripped down to the bare soil or had been burned by the farmers. Across the view, one only saw nothing but sharp black bristles. The dust had left the grass buried under 10 feet of sand. In 1931, 33 million acres were stripped bare in the southern plains. Crops toasted under the hot sun with the winds gathering both heat and strain during the months of July, August, and September. In the winter, there came no snow, and in the spring, the weather was too dry to farm, and the land began to peel with the upcoming months with no rain. If the rain was to come, there would be mud droplets by the time they reached the floor. High wheat prices once brought many farmers to the high plains and the opportunity to make their fortune, but during the Great Depression, many of these left their farms as they realized the economic was sad. In the early years of the Depression, the government began spending money to ship Hispanics out of the country, deporting about 6,024 back to Mexico.
During Franklin Roosevelt's administration, farmers felt like no one was listening. Some thought that no man's land was a waste of time, a desert waste. Roosevelt was fascinated by the idea of planting drought-tolerant trees in the dusted-over flatlands, creating a huge protected zone. In the summer of 1935, FDR launched the Second 100 Days as well as signed the Social Security Act to ensure that the pensionless elderly would not starve. The Works Progress Administration was to keep the government payroll rolling and back the National Labor Relations Act, which reinforced union rights in the workplace. The farm economy was improving, income higher by 50%, crop prices up by 66%.
African Americans already living in America had means of entertainment but still faced a hard time with the unemployment rate being 50%. They were apparently good for nothing but Negro toe tapping. As for the Mexicans and Mexican Americans, they grew up on ranches learning to farm and took any work, causing tension between them and the Anglos. By the 1930s, many of them were getting deported. During World War II, the Paseo program was made, which brought in the necessary skilled laborers. The Russian Germans also came to prosper and escape the Tsar. They were introduced to Kansas-Nebraska lands through brochures from railroads facing bankruptcy. They traveled from Kansas to Oklahoma in search for farmland and weren't welcomed by the shopkeepers. Living in Oklahoma for years, a language of German, some Russian, with a Texas-Oklahoma dialect developed. Despite all they experienced, they didn't want to abandon their land.
Lizzie White lived in a house of 5, wanting to leave to a safe place very badly. The dust pneumonia truly scared her, so her and her children did their very best to try to keep the dust out, and sometimes they couldn't even go outside since there were tons of dust covering the door. She swept what felt like endlessly throughout the day. She even shook at the sound of wind. Hazel Shaw was one of many whose children died during the Dust Bowl. No matter what they did, the dust always found its way to the baby, and in her case, her daughter died of the whooping cough. Between 1931 and 1937, Caroline on the right was a writer when a series of her letters and articles were published in the prestigious Atlantic Monthly. She dreamed of having a piece of land she could call her own. In her Letters from the Dust Bowl, Caroline provided a portrait of farmers who stayed to face the horrible conditions of the southern plains, writing about the daily struggles on her farm and the harsh realities of having an existence in a land of dust and depression. Her articles consisted of lyrical descriptions of the beautiful land that claimed her, the whiteness of our Mondays washing against the blue of the summer sky, the hush of early morning broken by the first bird's song. She also called attention to the changing place of agriculture in America, a nation that was becoming increasingly urban and industrial in its economy and vision. On New Year's Day, 1936, Don Hartwell began to write in his diary. In his diary, he wanted to leave something behind, perhaps a warning for future settlers. In his entries, he discussed how it's living in no man's land and his struggles in trying to support him and his family and trying to keep them alive. One of his entries states, "I haven't had much ambition anymore. When one sees all he has slipping away, his ambition seems to gradually go along with the rest."
Many farmers had migrated to the high plains to save their small part in fortune by being able to rent out tractors and a piece of ground by the Federal Farm Loan Act in 1916. However, the Great Depression of the 1920s was a continuous cycle of debt for farmers as a result of falling crop prices and debts they encountered to purchase expensive machines. Many of the farmers were being sunk into a deep hole of debt after the market crashed in 1929. As many farmers faced foreclosure, they begged the banks one last time. However, regular foreclosure sales in Boise City became a regular event. Many of these farmers strategized to only bid as low as 10 cents for any of the foreclosures being auctioned. Much of the crop's value decreased that farmers realized that their profit would be less than what it had cost to plant the crops in the first place and refused to sell at low prices. The country had raised the highest number of crops in history but were now faced with an economic wasteland with no money circulation.
As the stock market crashed on October 29, 1929, it left the value of the stock down by 40% and later was down 500%, at first only affecting the rich but later reaching the high plains. The Great Depression left the farmers down in the plains truly devastated because of the overproduction. Pounds and pounds of wheat were being stored up year after year because no one was buying them, and here were the farmers plowing up much land in the new machines, as the tractor depicted here. These new machines made farming way easier but were basically useless during the Great Depression because there was no point in all that farming if the crops weren't bringing in money. As much as banks would have wanted to help, they were also useless in helping farmers shape up their financial issues. Farmers began bidding 10 cents and no more for horses, which was quite an evil scheme, but being that the banks were in a financial crisis themselves and that it was a legal process, they couldn't do anything about it.
The Dust Bowl created very warm and windy climates, making it hard for many to breathe or even walk outside. Trees were skeletal due to the dust, and their gardens were barren. Barely anyone could harvest bushels or make any sort of income because of the aggressive windstorms that rarely stopped. Although, those that chose to stay, hoping things would blow over, dealt with the dust by sometimes putting wet towels in the open areas of their house to stop the dust from infiltrating their homes. They had also gummed down their windows and swept many times throughout the day. Over 7,000 people died due to the annihilating Dust Bowl, including infants who were prone to whooping cough and others who died of pneumonia.